Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I am Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started. IMF cuts global growth forecast and warns worst is yet to come. Report reads that for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession. The International Monetary Fund or IMF predicts global growth will slow to 2.7% next year, zero point 0.2 percentage point lower than what it predicted in July. Such downward revisions have happened quite frequently in the past few months. Look at these forecasts from the IMF. In 2021, global growth was predicted to be at 6%. This year, the IMF kept its growth forecast unchanged at 3.2%, and in 2023, growth forecast is now revised down to 2.7%. Look at inflation. It is expected to go from 4.7% in 2021 to 8.8% in 2022. That will be the peak. Then gradually it will start to come down, 6.5% in 2023 and 4.1% in 2024. It is a painfully slow move down, and we will have to live with elevated inflation for quite some time. Report points out that more than a third of global economy will see a recession, and three major economies, the US, the EU, and China, will continue to slow. The IMF laid out three major events currently hindering growth: Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, that is persistently high inflation, and China's economic slowdown. China's zero COVID policy and resulting lockdowns continue to hamper its economy. Add to that, property or real estate makes up 1/5 of China's economy, roughly. And as property market struggles there, effects will be felt globally. Now let's come closer to home. IMF cuts India's FY 2023 growth forecast to 6.8%. For FY 2023, IMF expected India to grow by 7.4% in their July forecast. Now they revised it down to 6.8%. World Bank has also slashed India's FY 2023 growth forecast from 7.5% predicted earlier to 6.5% in their latest prediction that came out last week. The Reserve Bank of India recently cut India's growth projection for FY 2023 from 7.2% to 7%. Bottom line, there is a growing consensus that India will not grow as fast as previously expected, in line with the slowdown that we are seeing globally. Let's look at some of the other economic indicators of India. IMF expects India's inflation to shoot up to 6.9% in FY 2023 from 5.5% seen in FY 2022. Then it will drop down to 5.1% in financial year 2024. Current account deficit or CAD or CAD is seen to be moving in sync with inflation. A positive current account deficit means more dollars are leaving the country than those coming in. In other words, India is importing more than what she exports when India registers a positive current account deficit. IMF predicts that current account deficit will increase from 1.2% in FY 2022 to 3.5% in FY 2023 and then moderate to 2.9% in FY 2024. Inflation is mirroring current account deficit. As current account deficit goes up, inflation is going up. This is telling us that what inflation India is witnessing is imported inflation and not due to domestic mismanagement of currency or money. Take a look at growth projections in a global context. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is taking a toll on the Russian economy. The IMF expects Russian economy to shrink by 3.4% in FY 2022 and shrink again by 2.3% in FY 2023. US and Eurozone are expected to slow down as we go into next year, both projected to grow at or below 1% in FY 2023. China is projected to grow at 3.2% in FY 2022 and accelerate to 4.3% next year. India is projected to slow down to a growth rate of 6.8% in FY 2023 and 6.1% in FY 2024. Even with downward revision to India's growth prospects, India will still remain world's fastest growing major economy. Next one is an update from Finance Ministry in India. Second half prudent spending to be norm. Finance Ministry was preparing to hold consultations with various ministries on October 10th to firm up revised estimates of the budget for FY 2023. Since the government expects a growth slowdown in the second half, the focus was going to be to make sure we don't add to the worsening situation by unnecessary fiscal stinginess. Keep in mind they are worried about not spending enough. See, government spending is one of the key components in GDP calculations. So if government spending goes down, GDP can go down. In the first half, in light of strong external headwinds like Russia-Ukraine war, high energy prices and inflationary pressures, government kept a lid on wasteful revenue spending, generating savings wherever possible. And keep this word in mind, revenue spending. Now the focus has shifted from saving for a rainy day to ensuring a more prudent and effective spending. There is going to be a stricter monitoring of expenditure, especially revenue expenditure. Let's understand what revenue expenditure or revenue spending is. An expenditure that neither creates assets nor reduces a liability is categorized as revenue expenditure. For example, salaries of government employees, interest payment on loans taken by the government, pensions, subsidies, grants, and so on. No physical asset is being created here, like a school building or a highway. So government states that this kind of non-asset creating expenditure will be monitored closely going forward. You can see for the past few months, revenue expenditure has already been tightening while capital expenditure has not. And capital expenditure is the kind of spending that creates an asset. Government expected growth to slow down in the second half and thus wanted to preserve its fiscal firepower during the first half. That's smart planning. Centre's fiscal deficit hit just 32.6% of the current financial year's target until August. In other words, government has not spent enough during the first half of this fiscal, which may allow them to ramp up spending during the second half. And why is that important? Well, like we discussed in the first two stories, the World Bank has slashed its FY 2023 growth forecast for India to 6.5% from 7.5% predicted in June. Chief Economic Advisor V. Anant Nageswaran stated that India might have to live with sub 7% growth in the near term. Add to that, commodity prices have spiked as a result of Russia-Ukraine conflict. In light of that, the government is already spending 2,40,000 crore rupees or roughly $30 billion a year to ensure food security to vulnerable sections. This is mostly food and fertilizer subsidy. And government aims to control fiscal deficit within the target of 6.4% of GDP. That is roughly 5,42,000 crore rupees or $70 billion for FY 2023. So there are a lot of limitations. Point being, economy will slow down due to the factors that are not in government's control. There is a limit to how much government can spend over and above the tax receipts. But because of prudent spending in the first half, government can ramp up capital expenditure in the second half to spur economic growth or at the very least dampen the downtrend in the growth that India is going to witness. Our final story of the week, government planning 7 to 8 more PLI schemes to expand coverage. The government is planning to launch 7 to 8 production linked incentive schemes in the next round soon in a bid to further expand coverage across critical manufacturing sectors, stimulate economic growth, and spur job creation, according to an official government source. 14 such schemes have been announced since 2020. They are estimated to lead to an incremental manufacturing of more than $500 billion over 5 years. In March 2020, first 3 PLI schemes were launched for mobile and specified electronic components, pharmaceutical API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and medical devices. The total initial outlay for these 3 programs was over 51,311 crore rupees, or roughly $6.4 billion over 5 years. Then, in November 2020, another 11 schemes were cleared by the cabinet. You can see the list on the right side of the screen. What caught my attention was telecom and networking products eyeing 5G and 6G developments, solar modules to ramp up green energy component in India's energy mix, advanced chemistry cell battery, keeping in mind that energy storage is going to be key if we want access to renewable energy all 24 hours of the day, not only when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And drones can be used both for civilian and military applications. Total initial allocation for these schemes was 1,46,000 crore rupees, or roughly $18 billion over 5 years. And now 7 to 8 more PLI schemes are being planned. The government states that schemes so far have received good response and continues to believe the PLI schemes will be a game changer because it has potential to boost manufacturing, economic growth, and job creation. Since the schemes are not demand-side stimulus measures, chances of them stoking price pressure in an already elevated inflationary environment is low, according to an official source in the government. India has an ambition to expand the share of manufacturing in the country's GDP to 25%. The share has remained stagnant at 16 to 17% for the past 3 decades. Expectation is that elevated manufacturing will ultimately spur exports as well as create a few global champions in each of the manufacturing sectors. To sum up this week's wrap, agencies like RBI, World Bank, the IMF have revised downward the growth projection for the US, China, the EU, India, and the larger world economy. Inflation is running high almost everywhere. This is going to be a challenging times for the middle class and the poor, especially in emerging economies like India. Government of India spent prudently in the first half of current fiscal. Now they can boost capital expenditure during the second half, which will support the economic growth. Government is also launching more PLI schemes to attract investment. I can say with fair amount of confidence that Government of India is certainly trying to boost economic growth for India in a global economic environment that is hostile to growth. I hope you enjoyed this week's wrap. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.